Good afternoon, and welcome back to Never Is Now, ADL's signature summit on anti-Semitism and hate. My name is Jolie Brislin, and I have the privilege to serve as ADL Nevada's Regional Director. Thank you for joining us. We are here today to take a deep dive into Holocaust education. At first glance, this seems to be a straightforward teaching. However, no matter how well-intentioned teachers are, we have seen that the way the Holocaust is taught varies. I have seen personally this wide spectrum, from teachers teaching that the Holocaust never existed and denouncing it, all the way to humanizing Hitler and talking about what a nice boy he was until his father beat him, or until he had a quote-unquote Jewish business partner in the art world that stole from him and created this animosity and hate towards Jews. Far too often, we are missing the mark. In a survey that was conducted on this subject, we found that 1 in 10 studied could not recall ever hearing the word Holocaust. 63% did not know that 6 million Jews were murdered in the Holocaust. And nearly half of all that responded could not name a single concentration camp established by the Nazis. These are disturbing statistics. A common belief among historians is that the Nazi military and the German government went to great lengths to keep the actions of the Holocaust secret from the German people themselves. Many people believe that they did this because they feared that the German citizens would not back such an atrocity. The strategy worked as much as it did because people didn't automatically know what to look for. What did a Holocaust in the early stages look like? It's hard for people to get their head around that. We have to ask the question, what might have happened if they had been taught about anti-Semitism, racism, or hatred? We'll never know the answer to that looking back, but we can build a better answer for the future. That is what we're trying to do. How do we prevent another event from happening? It's a complicated question and a big challenge, and that is what we are going to work towards today. We are very happy to have the opportunity to speak with this distinguished panel. First, U.S. Senator Jacky Rosen. Senator Rosen is serving in the United States Senate, is a United States Senator from the great state of Nevada since 2019. She previously was a U.S. Representative from Nevada's 3rd Congressional District, where she was ranked the 5th most bipartisan freshman in the 115th Congress. In her first year in the Senate, she was the co-founder of the Senate Bipartisan Task Force on Combating Anti-Semitism with Republican Senator Langford. She was recently named number 10 most influential Jew in the world by the Jerusalem Post. Thank you, Senator Rosen, for joining us.
Thank you.
Ariel Berman. Ariel Berman is ADL's Director of Echoes and Reflections. In her more than 13 years with Echoes, Ariel has played a role in marketing and outreach efforts, program planning, online program development, and partnerships. Ariel received her undergrad degree in religious studies at Lehigh University with a focus on Holocaust education and history. And a fun fact is that she sat on the first committee to choose the first Holocaust education chair at the university. So she has been setting principles around Holocaust her entire career. And lastly, Rachel Bresner. Rachel is ADL's Jean and Jerry Moore Southwest Civil Rights Council and provides oversight, advice, and legal strategic and public relation guidance related to civil rights issues to our entire Southwest region. That includes 6 regional offices. As part of her portfolio at ADL, Rachel leads the legislative efforts at the state level to ensure the Holocaust is taught in public schools. Thank you, Rachel, for being here. So let's get into this, right? Senator Rosen, it is so exciting to be able to have you on this panel today. The work that the ADL does with your office throughout the state of Nevada, as well as in Washington, D.C., We're so thankful to have you as a partner with ADL. And you hold this amazing distinction, and one that I am so proud of, as the third female Jewish senator in U.S. history, as well as the first former synagogue president to serve in the United States Senate. Because of your background, why do you find it so important to work on platforms that bring awareness to combat anti-Semitism?
Well, Jolie, thanks for the question. But first, I'm going to say I am proud to represent the great state of Nevada. Henderson, Nevada is my home, a greater Las Vegas area. And so the ADL region that Jolie represents is my home. My home, not just my home state, but really my neighborhood, not just my Jewish neighborhood, but my actual neighborhood. And what ADL has done for us in Nevada, as far as raising awareness, building with allies and partners across every bit of our spectrum, whether it's education or law enforcement or interfaith, you name it, they've really been at the forefront. And so before I answer the question, I have to give a shout out to my own home state, ADL, and the good work they're doing, of course, and the great work that ADL does nationwide and internationally, illuminating all of this. And so to answer the question honestly is, I've always believed, and the way I was raised, that it is our responsibility to our friends, to our neighbors, to our community, to educate, to be involved, to stand up, certainly fight anti-Semitism before it starts, to not be afraid to stand up and say you're Jewish. Maybe that's why I started my anti-Semitism task force with, of course, Senator James Lankford, bipartisan, but the first one ever in the United States Senate, because it is important to let people know that someone isn't afraid to stand up and have these difficult conversations, because it really is a critical time for Jewish Americans. The alarming rise of anti-Semitism, not just in the United States, across the globe, it's just stunning. And 2019, 75 years after the Holocaust, had over 50% increased rise in anti-Semitic assaults and incidents. And I believe just yesterday, or this week for sure, there was a hate crime report released by the FBI that has showed almost a 15%, a little over 14% increase in anti-Semitic incidents over the last year. These are no longer isolated incidents. And so the formation of our task force, we have been able to coalesce with our partners in the House, who've had one for a long time, the special envoy in the executive branch, and now diplomats, ambassadors, other world leaders. We are speaking with them. They have a place to come to in the Senate, and continue to work together to fight these issues. I'm pleased to say we have nearly, we're evenly split, D's and R's. You have to join with a partner, and we have nearly 40 members on, and it's going to be my mission to get 100% membership if I can for the United States Senate, because, like you said, anti-Semitism is not a partisan issue, and it should never be one.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. I know you inspire all of us on why we speak out, which is so important to this conversation. And we're going to dig deep into that and explore a little bit of the FBI numbers as well. So my next question goes to Ariel. This is a short question, but it's a really important one. So why is Holocaust education so critical in today's world?
Yeah, thank you, Jolie and Senator Rosen. We already touched on this a little bit by sharing all of the hate-fueled incidents that are going on in today's world. Each year, ADL records and reports on anti-Semitic incidents in the United States, and the 2019 numbers were the highest number of incidents on record. And particularly in the K-12 public schools, these numbers were 19% higher than they were in 2018. So young people today are seeing this violence and swastikas, Nazi salutes, anti-Semitic jokes, and other displays of images from the Holocaust, as well as analogies and Holocaust denial in the world around them. And they know and they see that it is so clear that anti-Semitism did not end with the Holocaust. And that's why now is the time to make sure that we are doing this accurately and effectively. Also, there's a distancing of memory from the event itself. The Holocaust happened now so long ago. And also there's a dwindling survivor population. So now it's really, really critical to put that responsibility in the hands of teachers who can educate their students to make a difference today.
Yeah. We talk about the survivors and how lucky we've been to this point that they've been able to give firsthand testimony to this horrific incident. So ADL knows that anti-Semitism is on the rise, and Senator Rosen just alluded to the fact that this week the FBI released its 2019 hate crimes data that showed that there was a 14% increase in anti-Jewish hate. Knowing that this hate is learned and with education can be unlearned, can you share what ADL is doing around Holocaust education?
Yeah, so ADL has been a leader in the field of Holocaust education for many years, and educating teachers and their students about the Holocaust has been central to ADL's mission for a really long time. I am the director of Echoes and Reflections at ADL, and it's a Holocaust education program for teachers and their students as a partnership of ADL, USC Shaw Foundation, and Yad Vashem. And this partnership of three leaders in the Holocaust education space is what makes the program and its work so powerful. This collaboration has allowed for Echoes and Reflections to deliver professional learning programs for teachers in all 50 states, reaching 72,000 educators in the last 15 years since we were founded in 2005. We do this through content and programs that share not only Holocaust history, but also the lessons for today with connections to the students' larger world, connections to things that students can really understand and relate to. So Echoes and Reflections extends this learning with conversations and resources and teaching about contemporary anti-Semitism, for example. Also the experiences of refugees during the Holocaust and their experiences today. Media literacy skills and the development of that in students' lives and in their world. And also helping students look at their personal choices and what that means for themselves and for their communities and society. Central to the study of the Holocaust is an understanding of anti-Semitism. This is not only a focus of Echoes and Reflections, an important context to provide in Holocaust education, but it's also really central and a focus of the larger work of ADL. I want to share here that ADL just released an online course direct to students called BNA, and it stands for Building Insights to Navigate Anti-Semitism and Hate. And through this and through the Holocaust education programming at ADL, we'll continue doing this into the future and impacting teachers and their students with lessons about the Holocaust and about anti-Semitism.
That's wonderful. You know, Echoes and Reflections is such an important program that we have here throughout the state of Nevada. We use it in both Clark County School District as well as Washoe County, are two of our major school districts in the state. And we know the outcomes and we know the statistics that come when teachers use this training. So you're doing a fantastic job. And I know that Senator Rosen, you know, kind of just to bring it back to, I know the support that you give around Holocaust education, and to help support Holocaust education across the country, you actually introduced legislation, a bipartisan Never Again Education Act that was enacted just this past May into law. Senator, as a sponsor and a champion of this bill, what does the Never Again Education Act seek to address, and how will it work in practice?
Well, I appreciate the question, and I'm really happy about the work that Echoes and Reflections is doing with partners all around within our country and around the globe. But I was really pleased that on May 29th, the Never Again Education Act was signed into law. It was an amazing day for me. I think an amazing day that will actually move Holocaust education forward in this country, and I'm going to tell you why. It really does some of the things, it builds on what you've been doing at ADL, but this time, for the first time, through our National Park Service, which is the funder and what the Holocaust Museum falls under, the jurisdiction it falls under, we are going to, through the National Holocaust Museum, fully fund $10 million over the next 5 years for them to help coordinate, develop, disseminate, train teachers, do the kinds of things that Echoes and Reflections is doing, and let that be disseminated throughout the country. It's going to give good quality curriculum, teacher training like you've been doing, free of cost, so that we can educate. Why do we educate? Because we all know that throughout our lives, if you haven't been exposed to things, you shouldn't just suddenly wake up and be 30 years old and never have heard any history, let alone never heard history of the Holocaust. You know, I was president of our synagogue, and Jolie, we know a lot of the same people. Las Vegas is a small community. We know people who are parents, their parents are Holocaust survivors, went to our synagogue. We know them. We know their stories. We've seen them grow old and unfortunately pass away. But when they're not here, we have to carry those stories forward. We know that as Jews, that their memories should serve not just as a blessing, but as that light that moves us forward. And these are the kinds of things that we can invest in, so that never again means never again for anyone, and that education about hate can't be normalized. About anti-Semitism can't be normalized. Oh, it's just a joke. Oh, this is just a joke. It's not just a joke. And when you begin to normalize all of that, I know you have the No Place for Hate programs as well. It is just incredibly important that you stand up and say, no, this is not the normal we want to be. And we also have to awaken people to understand history, because if you don't see where you've been, you can't. History, it has the ability to not just educate us, but to give us a guidepost or guide path towards the future. In some cases, what we want to be like, and in this case, what we don't want to be like. And so we have to use it for that. And that's why I'm so excited for this bill. It should be receiving its funding soon, and we'll be able to coordinate with ADL and other organizations and be sure every school district in this country teaches Holocaust education in a meaningful way.
That's wonderful, Senator Rosen. And I know ADL is really excited to be able to partner with you and the Park Service to make sure that that is being implemented throughout the states. As you know, ADL is a leader in the space of legislative and education initiatives. And this was a bill that that Jonathan Greenblatt really took on personally, making phone calls and really pushing leadership and urging them to get this done. And so we are very pleased that we were able to partner with you on this great work. As you said, never again. Never again means teaching. Never again means educating and to empower our students when they see hate or bigotry, discrimination, to speak out. And that's really what we're hoping that we're going to be able to achieve in all of this. And I think you summed it up beautifully. Thank you. Okay. So, we've been talking about what we've seen around laws and what could work. And we're really thankful for the Never Again Education Act. Ariel, can you go a little bit into, does a teacher need to have a mandate or a law to be teaching the Holocaust?
No, they don't. But it really does help to have legislation to support the teachers in their for Holocaust instruction. However, we've seen really extraordinary commitment to Holocaust education among school districts, decision makers, and educators in states where there is no legislation requiring Holocaust education. Teachers can choose to add a study of the Holocaust into their U.S. or world history units, or into language arts, psychology, fine arts classes, or others, and try to align Holocaust education with their standards and with the instructional time that they have in the classroom. Some of the most effective ways of teaching about the Holocaust is through primary sources. Video testimony from Holocaust survivors and other witnesses, photos, artwork, poetry, letters, and maps are really useful, and these can be integrated into a variety of subject areas at the teacher's discretion and with the support of school administration.
That's wonderful. And it's something that I've seen here throughout the state that school districts really appreciate, is when they can have be able to use curriculum and multifaceted approaches that maybe are not just within an English class, but also within a debate class or so on and so forth. So that way you're able to take some of these trainings and be able to use them in a broader sense and have them infiltrate more of everyday experiences. So that actually answered one of the questions that that we were receiving from a viewer, was about how do we take this, how do we use some of these best practices? But maybe you can just kind of go a little bit deeper on that and kind of go into to expand on from the Holocaust education, whether it's the ADL programs or other Holocaust education programs that we are going to use for curriculum.
Yeah, so I can explain a little bit about what Echoes and Reflections does to support schools and school districts across the country. We reach out to the decision makers at the school districts, whether it's a school administrator, principal, director of curriculum instruction, to work with them to develop a program, a workshop for teachers that really creates a learning plan for those teachers. So with we have a variety of focuses. Again, Echoes and Reflections has 11 multi-part classroom-ready units available that teachers can bring directly into their classroom. But what we do when we're working with school districts is we work with them on areas of focus and how we can best support their teachers as they're going to return to their classrooms with the Echoes and Reflections materials to reach their students and make an impact with Holocaust instruction.
Thank you so much. A question for Senator Rosen that we received was, do you have to have, in order to get Holocaust funding, do you have to have in order to receive funding from Never Again Education Act, do you have to have a mandate in your state?
So no. So how the Never Again Education Act works is we are going to fully fund the program through the Holocaust Museum. They will develop the curriculum, training materials, and then have a program to disseminate those free of charge across the country to and just have a program out there. It will be up to all of us to be sure that school districts all across the country know that these things will be available, where they can get them, how they can sign on, and how the Holocaust Museum can best help them, but it will be free to them. And so we are just giving the Holocaust Museum the funds and the wherewithal to create that central point of contact for everyone. And so they do not have to have a mandate. They don't have to have funds. They just have to have the will to want to bring this robust curriculum, whether it's the kind that you have with Echoes and Reflections, whether you do it in art class and history class, and wherever those things might be right for the age bracket or the school district, they're going to help facilitate that.
That's wonderful. Thank you. So we received a question, and I think it's just a great moment for education. Why is the Holocaust Museum under the Park Service?
Well, in Washington, D.C., you have it's part of the whole Smithsonian, and all the Smithsonian is actually under the National Park Service. And so the Museum of African American History, the American History, all of the Space and Air, all the museums, when you come to Washington, when it eventually will be open again, the zoo, the botanical gardens and all of that, they all exist under the Park Service. And so that's why that's the funding mechanism for that. And I do want to say one more thing about the bill's bipartisan support. In the House, it had over 300 bipartisan sponsors. And in the Senate, it had over 80, and we passed unanimously. And so that's a pretty big deal to have something with that much support and to go unanimously through. Certainly in the Senate, and I wanted to put that out there that people do realize this. That's why I know I can continue to build upon what we started this last year.
And Senator Rosen, I just think that's such an important part, especially as we find that we're so divided on so many issues, to see that we have a similarity and that we all come together on educating the future and each other in the current moment about the history so that we never repeat it. It's a beautiful testimony to how we can work together. I know one of your famous lines that I quote you quite often on is fight where you must, agree where you can. And it's, did I get that right, Senator?
Agree where you can and fight where you must. Absolutely.
Agree where you can, fight where you must. And it's wonderful to see when we're able to come together on such important topics and to be able to agree and push it forward unanimously. So thank you. Ariel, has there been any pushback from the public on bringing Holocaust education to the classroom?
So I'm going to reference the claims conference survey that you referred to at the beginning in your introduction. That's the survey that shared that young people don't know Holocaust facts. One really big bright spot in that in the results of that survey is that 93% of those surveyed believe that Holocaust education is important in schools and should be taught in schools. So the public is in overwhelming support to bring Holocaust education to schools.
Wonderful. Rachel, how many states currently require Holocaust education?
Currently, 15 states across the country have laws that require Holocaust education. Of course, these laws are different and they can vary significantly from state to state. There are 3 other states that encourage Holocaust education, but they don't mandate the education. So it is more of a recommendation or a suggestion. And then there's 15 states, some of them that also have mandates or permissive laws that have Holocaust and genocide commissions that I spoke about a little bit before. And then, as Ariel mentioned, 93% of adults believe that Holocaust education should be implemented in all schools. So there is a desire for Holocaust education and improvement in the quality. And, as far as for 2020, even with the pandemic and many legislative sessions were cut short or used solely for emergency measures, we had 4 states, Colorado, Delaware, New Hampshire, and Virginia, who all passed laws requiring Holocaust education in the state. So it's really exciting, and there is some momentum behind this state legislative initiative. If we're looking ahead, and now we're getting ready to start the 2021 legislative sessions, we're looking at legislators, we're calling on legislators to support the education in their states. It's so important because it would ensure that the Holocaust is taught consistently and appropriately within the public schools. And so right now we are working with on-the-ground partners and lawmakers in several states to get legislation filed in the upcoming legislative sessions.
Great. Senator Rosen, as we looked ahead on the state legislative front, can we look ahead on the federal front? So as we look forward to the upcoming 117th Congress, what are the next steps for implementing the Never Again Education Act? And more broadly, how can this bipartisan task force for combating anti-Semitism further promote Holocaust education both domestically and internationally?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we believe that there will be the full funding for the 5 years, $10 million. And so that should get funded, hopefully, in the 21 budget. So we should see that coming forward, and then they'll be able to develop and disseminate and do all of that. But I will tell you more broadly, my bipartisan task force, we have had international recognition of what we've been doing. I've been on the phone. Sometimes when there's news events, I'm able to quickly get on the phone with ambassadors or other leaders in countries when they're doing something we don't agree with or we think could be problematic. I've also done the same in a positive note. I have spoken with some members of Knesset who are interested in possibly forming a task force to combat global anti-Semitism and work with us in the United States Senate. In the executive branch, of course, there's a special envoy to combat anti-Semitism. We're actively trying to promote that position to the ambassador level. What does that mean? It means it's going to get funding and support and, again, international recognition, regardless of the whim of any administration to fund or fill that position. So we're going to work towards that. And I think that now that both houses of Congress have this task force, they see what we've been able to do. Some of our job is to educate, some to illuminate, some to legislate. But when they know that we're here, we absolutely, Senator Langford and I, together as a team with Ted Deutsch and others in the House, have had phone calls. They know where to call, and they know that they're going to get a comprehensive have a comprehensive discussion with us. So I think that's what we're going to do. And the other last thing that I'm going to mention while we're doing the Holocaust Museum, before COVID hit, I was planning to do a congressional field trip for the senators, one's on my committee and any others that were interested, over to the Holocaust Museum where they would give us a special presentation. Give us a shorter presentation, maybe half a day or whatever, to explain what led up to the Holocaust, what they've been doing, why education is important, and why this task force is important. Because I want to be sure that each one of them understands the history and how that informs our responsibility to the future, not just of our country and our children, but responsibility to the world. So hopefully we're going to do that when things reopen a bit, and we'll have some robust discussion amongst us senators here and any House members that may want to join us as well.
I think that's so wonderful because you have the ability to, again, show the stories, have it be something that's tangible that can be taught and looked at and felt, and, you know, really understanding and having the feeling and hearing stories puts such a personal perspective to it, that when you see other things happening in society, that you're able to reference back to those stories and those moments of education that will hopefully spark something in you that says, this is not okay, and I need to speak out. And so I love, and ADL often uses the backdrop of the Holocaust Museum as an education tool. So I think that that's a wonderful field trip, and I hope it's one that everybody will take a part of. So let's go to Rachel, and if we can kind of just talk about some legislative pushback. Do all legislators support Holocaust mandates, or are there some who push back against it?
So it's extremely rare for a legislator to push back on the need for Holocaust education based on the content. I think that there's an understanding and agreement on the importance of Holocaust education and on teaching the universal lessons of the Holocaust, especially to our youth. And we're lucky that this issue receives bipartisan and almost universal support, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's always smooth sailing, because there are other reasons that legislators might oppose these bills. There's some legislators who are fundamentally opposed to any educational mandate from a state or federal perspective, and strongly believe that it should be up to each individual school district to form their own curriculum and their own standards. So it's not the content or the topic that's disputed as much as it is the method, which is the mandate part of it. And then there are legislators who may oppose the bill because of the fiscal implications to the state. Their stance is that without some way to raise additional funds for the implementation of the mandate, that it will pull away money from other vital programs that may be struggling for funding as is, and therefore will increase a deficit within the state. So we definitely hear those two concerns. And, not surprisingly, the fiscal situation right now is even more dire given the pandemic. And, so not surprisingly, we do and are hearing those concerns. And those are two hurdles that I would say are the main hurdles to overcome in the minds of some lawmakers. Luckily, though, they rarely cause the prospects of the bill's passage to be, completely tanked or completely rejected.
Yeah, I definitely think that in some of the pieces of legislation that we have in states right this moment, as we sit in the situation of COVID, it's definitely going to be difficult to have bills with a fiscal note to it. And so I know that that's always one of our concerns. But hopefully, as we're building this legislation on the state level, we'll be able to grow it over time to be able to have innovative ways of funding, right? And to go back and to address some of these funding if we're not able to do it because of COVID. So I think that's really great. Senator Rosen, is there any effort on the federal level to mandate meaningful and comprehensive Holocaust education in a public primary school?
I'm not sure that there is right at this moment. That's why it was so important that we do the bill that the way we did it. Because when we fund the creation of quality curriculum that is consistent across platforms that you can give it regardless of grade, whether it's elementary school, might be different than junior high or high school, then the states can just take that with no fiscal cost to themselves. But of course, the states and then the individual school districts, depending what state you're in, they have their own jurisdictions. So we have to give them autonomy in that. And we felt the best thing we can do is say, here it is. And when you do it, if you do it, or we hope that you do it, here's a vehicle. You don't have to create it on your own or figure it out. And we've shown that we believe it's important by funding it and developing it. And so that's why we did it in this particular way.
Great. Ariel, we were talking with Rachel about some of the pushback that we received from legislators. Can you tell us what is some of the pushback that we received from teachers about teaching the Holocaust, and how can Echoes and Reflections help?
Sure. I mean, we rarely hear pushback from teachers who don't want to teach about the Holocaust. Really, their barriers come from what they're being told they can and cannot teach in a class or in their classes. And particularly now during COVID times, when instructional time is cut or teaching is virtual or there are other areas of focus that need to be covered, there isn't so much time to really go deep into this topic. Most teachers just want to teach it for longer and want to be able to devote more time to it. Others may use approaches to Holocaust education that could harm students, like not providing context, graphic imagery, or simulation activities. But Echoes and Reflections offers support to teachers through our classroom ready lessons that can be pulled from our website, brought directly into the classroom, and also trainings for teachers that give them strategies and tools and those resources to help them teach about the Holocaust. We help build teachers' confidence when teaching about the Holocaust, and kind of enhance their ability to effectively teach about the Holocaust through the support that we're able to give.
And have you had to readapt because of COVID?
Yeah, so we've made a lot of changes. I'm sure, as everyone on this panel and on this call knows, everything is virtual now, of course. And whereas we were delivering in-person, on-site programs for teachers going out all across the country to see teachers and train teachers face-to-face, we've put that all online. We adapted quickly, and we were able to work with these host organizations like school districts and museums and professional development providers to continue to offer professional development for teachers. We also do 1-hour webinars on a variety of topics, and we have 2 online courses. So we made an effort to really continue to provide these learning opportunities for teachers even through this pandemic, and the response has been huge. Really, teachers still wanted it and still needed it and still felt as though they wanted to get those tools so that they could still reach their students even in a remote or virtual environment. And they heard from us kind of those best practices for doing so, and along with the content to do so.
Yeah, I've had such positive feedback from some private schools as well as school districts that they've been able to easily access this online portal for Echoes and Reflections, so their teachers can continue to learn how to teach the Holocaust. So, you know, we're all pivoting and swirling and ducking, but Echoes and Reflections has just done a fantastic job readapting to provide these resources in a continuous way. I would love to ask a question to all of our panelists. We've been talking a lot about the Holocaust and never again, but one of the questions I want to ask is, when we're talking about Holocaust education, should we only be talking about the Holocaust, or should we be adding in other genocides as well? Rachel, do you want to answer first?
Sure. So ADL's model language includes genocide and education about other atrocities, with the view that Holocaust education can complement genocide education, and that Holocaust education should serve as an introduction to a continuing conversation of genocide and discrimination, which includes talking about genocides around the world. And so we encourage the inclusion of other genocides when it comes to state legislation and in education in general. And that's for many reasons. But one is that the overarching lessons that can be learned from these atrocities really help to open the door to further conversation and action. And so I think it's really important to have other genocides. I'm speaking from the legislative perspective, but.
Thank you. Senator Rosen?
Well, you know what, I was, as I was listening, I was writing some of the same thing you just said, that it does open conversation. So we know, most recently, 75 years ago with the Holocaust and survivors, unfortunately, passing away, but a lot of people knew them, like I did, Jolie, like you did, I'm sure like many of the viewers on the call, and even down to our own children may still know some, but that's going to quickly go away. So having this kind of education about what happened and what we should be thinking about, how we should be treating others, because it is a lesson about hate generally. This happened to us, and it was a form of anti-Semitism, but it does open up someone's mind to understand about hate generally, and how your actions matter, and what you stand for matters, and what you speak up for matters, and what you don't say can also matter, because what you don't say, and if you turn your eye to it, you may allow something to happen. So all those lessons, I think, are life lessons for particularly our kids who may deal with bullying and not just anti-Semitism and other kinds of forms for other particular reasons. Of course, hate is nothing new in this world and may deal with all kinds of other issues. And I think that those lessons can just be applied, that what you do and what you say and who you are, it matters and it counts. And this is just an entree into understanding that in a particular way, but I do think it helps it all.
Yeah, that's great. Ariel?
Yeah, I agree with what Rachel said and what Senator Rosen said, and I just want to add a little bit to it to say that the study of the Holocaust helps students understand other genocides. It also helps them understand human rights violations and other mass atrocities. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance actually refers to the Holocaust as the paradigmatic genocide. And a lot of genocide scholars grew out of a study of the Holocaust and what happened. Specifically, in 1944, Raphael Lemkin, as many of you know, coined the word genocide. A study of the Holocaust and other genocides allows students to highlight key similarities and differences between genocides, to look at common patterns, to analyze the stages of genocide and how genocide happens, and also how society can rebuild after a genocide.
Thank you. Senator Rosen, this question is for you, and it's kind of going off of the Holocaust education conversation we've been having, but it still falls within the importance of teaching about the Holocaust. So over the past few months, both prior to and after the presidential election, there have been an unfortunate amount of Holocaust-related analogies made by journalists, celebrities, and politicians. ADL has long called out those who seek to draw any kind of modern-day comparison to Nazis. Senator Rosen, how do you see the impact of these comparisons to the Holocaust and looking at that through the lens of Holocaust education and the need for it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because the way we consume our media and social media and the internet, it's easy to allow things maybe to be normalized or just to be put out there so often we're not really noticing it with the importance or impact that we should, because the Holocaust is one of the most horrific parts of human history. And I don't think we can necessarily compare to it something that's taking place in the modern day. And so this is why the education is important. So we may see trends, we may see behaviors, we may see these things that could lead to further persecution or discrimination, anti-Semitism in this case, and that's how we're going to work in our public spaces and even in our private spaces, in our community, in our home, in our synagogues, churches, mosques, where have you, doing that education. It is a powerful tool. We owe it to the legacy of the survivors. And we just have to be sure that when we have that discourse about the Holocaust, that we don't diminish it by putting it out everywhere like it's just something that happens every day. And this is how we should not be using it as a political weapon. We can't trivialize it. This is how it stays bipartisan and important. This was a hopefully a unique thing that won't ever happen again. We need to be sure that we don't try to have everything else compared to that. And so I think it is a great question, and a reason why we must educate so people understand the severity and the depth of the human toll and generational toll that the Holocaust took on the world.
So I'm so sad that our time is coming to an end. But before we do wrap up, I would love to and Senator Rosen, I think a lot of your remarks actually go into this final question, but if we can just get a brief, just few words, a few lines of, in your view, ideally, how does the focus on Holocaust education make a difference in today's world? And what are you hoping for?
Well, what I'm hoping for is really to have these difficult conversations. We know that throughout history, anti-Semitism has reared its ugly head time and time again. So we know when we have these conversations and this kind of education, it leads us to broader conversations and maybe a broader level of understanding. And if these teachers and school districts adopt this, maybe they will adopt more robust curriculum to allow more of our world and nation's history to be spoken about. When you bring things out from under the shadows or from when people don't know it, never been exposed to it, not heard it, then it absolutely brings us to a place where we can have those conversations. And so this is how we take the lessons of the past, we honor those whose shoulders we stand on, in whatever history you're talking about. This is how we honor their legacy, to stand up and use that as a blueprint for what we have to do in positive ways to point us on a pathway for the future. And with hate in so many areas, corners of our world now, I think that there's nothing more important than starting here.
Well, Senator Rosen, I don't think that anybody could top that answer or feel any differently. And so I thank you all. We know that the story of the Holocaust is a complicated one. Making sure that it is thoughtfully and accurately remembered by each generation is critical, but equally complicated. If we are to fulfill the promise of never again, then we have to bring together our best ideas, our most successful strategies, and make sure that we can make good on the promise. If we continue to have days like today, conversations like this, and we are able to lead people like these brilliant, dedicated, amazing women that were on this panel today, I know that we're going to be able to continue to bring awareness and to change people's hearts and minds. And so thank you all for joining us on this panel today. I think everyone learned a lot and has a lot of items to be able to go back and to think about and tangible steps. And I thank you all for being part of Never Is Now.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut 06904. Or you can call the JBS Pledge Line at 833-MY-JBS-TV. That's 833-695-2788. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. We thank you for your kind support.